By the age of 7, Clara already understood more about loneliness than many adults would learn in their entire lives. She grew up within the cold walls of an old orphanage, where smiles were rare and hugs were almost legends. Still, there was something about her that no one could erase, that faint spark of hope in her eyes. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was just the way she found to survive the absence of parents, of affection, of belonging. From an early age, Clara had to learn that the world is not always fair, but that, even so, it is possible to walk with dignity. It was a cloudy afternoon when everything began to change. The orphanage had received an unusual invitation. The children would attend a small party at an elegant estate on the outskirts of town, a gesture of charity made by one of the most traditional families in the region, the Delamar. Clara, curious about the chance to see what existed beyond the walls, accepted the invitation as if seizing a unique opportunity. And, in fact, it was not because of the stunning decor or the foods she had never tasted before, but because of a boy. Enzo was different from the others. He had his shirt ironed, his shiny shoes, and a watchful eye. But what drew the most attention was his way of seeing Clara. He did not see her as the orphan of charity, as the adults whispered in the corners. Enzo saw her as someone, and it was there, between one game and another in the mansion's large garden, that something rare was born, a sincere, unpretentious friendship, one of those that ignore social barriers before the world teaches us how to put them on. In the following days, Clara could only think of the boy with the curious eyes who spoke to her as if they were the same. And, to her surprise, Enzo didn't forget her either. He asked his mother to invite her again. And then again. Clara began to visit the Delamar's house with some frequency, always with permission of the orphanage. She felt strange in that environment of porcelain and antique furniture. But next to Enzo, everything seemed light. They shared stories, secrets, and even some dreams. But the charm would not last long. On a silent afternoon, Clara inadvertently overheard a conversation that was not for her. Enzo's mother, in an icy tone and full of contempt, said to her husband, "This classless girl is starting to feel at home. This needs to end." Clara didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. That night, she realized that there were invisible boundaries she couldn't cross. And as much as her friendship with Enzo was genuine, the world around them had already decided that they didn't belong to the same story. The invitations have ceased. The visits are over. And so, contact between the two was interrupted, as if it had never existed. Enzo tried to resist, tried to question, but he was just a boy in the face of the rigidity of a family obsessed with status. On Clara's side, the rejection came like a punch. For the first time, she felt the weight of the hidden truth that no one in the orphanage spoke out loud. The outside world would not be kind to her. Still, there was something that not even the coldness of that family could tear off. The impact that that brief bond had on the girl's heart. Clara did not resent it. She didn't know how to hate. But their silent force was born. One kind of silent promise that only those who have been injured know how to make. That of turning pain into fuel. She didn't know how or when, but she felt that this would not be the end of her journey. If you were moved by this part of the story, leave the like and subscribe to the channel to follow the rest of this journey of transformation and overcoming. Clara grew up in a place that looked more like a limbo. The orphanage was not the home she dreamed of. The cold walls and the always distant faces were the same day after day. But for her, the worst thing was not loneliness or lack of affection. The worst thing was knowing that, even there was a glaring difference between her and the other girls. While some had the illusion that they could be adopted, that someday some kind heart would take them out of that place, Clara already knew that the world made no promises. She also knew that if it wasn't for herself, nothing would happen. The pain of being an orphan was not only in the loss of her parents, but in knowing that the whole society seemed to look at her as something disposable, like a piece that no one needed, a classless piece. Clara was aware of this from an early age. She remembered how the other children, on the few visits of families to the orphanage, were embraced and welcomed, while she stood in the shade, watching with a heavy heart. She didn't have a strong name, a surname that opened doors, or a story that enchanted others. But that didn't stop her from having dreams. Rather, It was these dreams that kept her alive, that fed her soul with something more than pain. It was among books that Clara found a refuge. Each page turned was an opportunity to escape from that world without color, without future. She devoured everything that fell into her hands. It didn't matter if it was an adventure novel or a story about scientists. For her, the simple act of learning was liberating. She didn't yet know what the future held for her, but she knew that books would be the key to opening any door that came her way. While the other girls were distracted by games, or in some cases, by the fear of what would become of their lives, Clara dedicated herself to her studies as an obsession. She knew that as long as she had something to learn, as long as she had something to achieve, the orphanage would not be the end of her story. But the mentality of society around her has never been easy to ignore. Every disguised look, every gesture of contempt, was like a sharp blade cutting through his hopes. However, Claire refused to be defined by what others saw in her. Each time someone looked at her and judged her for being different, she took a deep breath and asked herself, how can I use this to my advantage? She knew that prejudice against her would not come only from others, but from a social system that often left the most vulnerable behind. But instead of succumbing to anger, she used it as fuel. Anger, for Clara, was a motivation to be more, be stronger, be smarter, to be more than what the world said she was. The days were hard, many moments of insecurity and loneliness. But the night was when she felt like she could breathe more freely. That's when she could finally be with herself, without the pressure of being judged. And there in the stillness, with her eyes tired but shining with the flame of determination, Clara thought of all that could be. In her mind, she saw herself leaving that place. She saw herself in a future that no one else imagined for her. She saw herself not just as a survivor, but as a victor. Every obstacle, every rejection, prepared her for what was to come, for the transformation she didn't yet know she was about to experience. It was this hope that guided her. It was not a naive or blind hope, but hope built on effort, hard work, and firm decisions. She knew that the reality around her wasn't going to change overnight. I knew that society would not wake up and see everyone as equal, but she also knew that her worth didn't depend on the views of others. It was worth itself, and somehow that sustained it. Clara's future was uncertain, but she was not afraid of it. On the contrary, she embraced uncertainty with courage, because for her, living was a constant new beginning. Each day was a chance to change, to grow, to transform pain into something useful. She didn't allow suffering to define her, but rather the way she got up every morning and fought for a place in the world. His dreams weren't just about money or status. Clara dreamed of a life in which she could look back and see that, despite everything, she had been able to write her own story. It didn't matter what the world thought of her. What mattered was what she thought of herself. She knew that by moving forward, she was not only changing her life, but also inspiring transformation in those who watched her from afar, unaware of the silent power she carried. But, like any journey, this would not be a solitary walk. Somewhere, at some point, Clara would meet someone who would see in her more than a number, more than a sad story. And this someone, even without knowing it, would have an important role in his life. But to understand the impact of this connection, it would be necessary for Clara to go through a few more tests, more challenges, more difficult decisions. The truth is, her journey was just beginning, and the twists and turns were closer than she imagined, because, while she was on her way, another being was about to cross her path, and that meeting, full of potential and mystery, would forever change their lives. And when Clara finally realized the impact that this meeting would have, she would understand that every tear shed, every night alone, and every step taken against all expectations were necessary for her to get there. The future awaited her was something grander than she could ever imagine, and she was about to discover it in a transformative way. With this, what seemed to be a story of pain and abandonment would begin to take on new meaning. After all, Clara's life was about to turn around in a way that few could have predicted, a comeback that would make even the most skeptical stop to look and realize that the impossible, for her, never existed. The transformation was about to begin, and she was prepared to live this journey to the end. As Clara progressed through adolescence, the weight of the world seemed to intensify, But something inside her also strengthened. The pain and loneliness of the orphanage, although still very present, began to lose its power over her. It was not that Clara had stopped feeling. No, she felt everything intensely, as if each emotion was a storm inside her chest. But what was changing about her, quietly and steadily, was her mindset. She no longer saw obstacles as impenetrable barriers, but as stones in a way to be overcome. Her journey, which had begun with the search for a better life, now turned into a mission of self-affirmation. It was difficult, of course. Every day brought new challenges. When the other teenagers were beginning to understand themselves as people in the world, Clara was already carrying a burden that seemed to weigh 3 times as much. She was orphaned and poor, without the support of family or the safety net that many around her took for granted. But her will was unbreakable, and she knew that if she wanted any chance to change her reality, she should study, she should excel. On school days, Clara was that quiet girl who preferred to be alone in the last chair in the room, not because he didn't like company, but because learning was his only way to resist. Each book he read, each content he mastered, represented a step in his journey of transformation. She didn't care if others saw her as weird. In fact, she knew that in order to achieve what she wanted, she had to be seen differently. She couldn't fit into the same mold as the others, because her future couldn't just be a repeat of the past. But this fight was not simple. Many suspicious looks, many silent comments were always present, trying to make Clara believe that she was not capable. There were those who mocked her ambition, those who saw her as someone out of place, an orphan with no future. Even so, she persisted. As much as the pain of being different was unbearable at times, she clung to what was in her hands. And what she had was her effort, her study, her determination. It was fascinating to observe the transformation that took place in her. When he began to understand something difficult, such as a complex mathematical concept or a scientific theory, there was something in his eyes. It was as if she was overcoming not only matter, but also the world that was trying to bring her down. It was more than just an academic step. It was a sign that she had control of the situation, and she felt it strongly. Every academic achievement, every time she managed to take a test and come out with a good result, was a victory against everything and everyone who said she wasn't good enough. She was beginning to realize that education was not only the key to a better future, but also a tool to rewrite her history. Gradually, Clara gained confidence. She no longer saw herself as the invisible girl of the orphanage, but as a young woman capable of building her own path. But, of course, the transformation process did not take place without resistance. The obstacles she faced, especially during adolescence, were even greater and more intense. The lack of resources was one of the biggest ones. Clara knew that she would not have a luxury education, that she could not attend the best schools or take private courses. But somehow, she used her reality as fuel. She studied at night, when everyone was asleep, and tried harder than anyone around her. Far from being an example of perfection, she had her moments of doubt, of despair. It was common to wonder if all that was worth it. But when she thought about the future, she saw the possibility of a different life. And that was enough to get her up every day. Adolescence brought not only emotional and academic challenges, but also the first steps towards independence. Clara knew that in order to continue her journey of transformation, she would need to learn how to take care of herself in a practical way. It was at this stage that he began to work, first in small jobs, as a helper in a convenience store, and then, with great effort, in a small coffee shop. These jobs were not his dreams, but they were the seeds of his independence. She knew that every penny she earned was a part of her freedom, and that was all she wanted. The freedom to decide your destiny. Gradually, Clara realized that her effort was beginning to bear fruit. Her results at school stood out, and she was soon noticed by a teacher who, in an act of faith in her potential, recommended her for a scholarship at a more renowned high school. It was a dream come true, an opportunity that Clara knew she would need to grab tooth and nail. It was a golden chance, a chance to make everything work. But she also knew that this path would not be easy. The scholarship did not cover all the costs, and Clara would still need to continue working while she studied. But even in the face of more obstacles, Clara did not waver. She embraced each difficulty as a learning opportunity. His nights of double work, his mornings of restless study, became part of his routine. She became more and more determined, more focused on her transformation. As she grew older, Claire began to understand something crucial. True strength came not from her background, but from her ability to keep fighting, no matter how hard. She was shaping herself not only as a student, but as a human being, as someone who knew her life was in her hands. And in her mind, she knew that no matter how much others tried to stop her from moving forward, she would be stronger than any obstacle. Because Clara was not just a teenager in search of a better future. She was forging a new identity, an identity of overcoming and resistance. Each step taken toward her dreams was more than a personal victory. It was a reminder that when you decide not to give up, doors begin to open, possibilities begin to emerge, and transformation is inevitable. And there, in the heat of adolescence, in the fire of daily hardship, Clara was becoming more than a survivor. She was becoming protagonist of her own story. Every challenge, every mistake, and every little success shaped her into something even bigger, more audacious. She was beginning to see herself no longer as an orphan and forgotten girl, but as a woman who was creating a legacy of her own, someone capable of redefining her destiny with each choice she made. And as she looked to the future, Clara knew that the battle was not yet won, but she also knew that with her transformation mindset, there was nothing that could stop her from moving forward. Time, as always, acted silently, but with devastating power. For Clara, the reunion with Enzo did not seem to be just any meeting, but a moment loaded with symbolism. That meeting, which took place in the middle of a seemingly ordinary party, seemed like a sign, an open window to a past that, no matter how hard it tried to bury, always found a way to get back on its feet. She couldn't deny the impact of his presence, the way life, with its unpredictable game, had brought them together again. The event, with all its music, laughter, and twinkling lights, seemed to unmask what was going on there between them. To the world, it was just another night, but Clara knew that, in that instant, the past and the present were on a thin line, about to intertwine irreversibly. The feeling she had was that time had given them both a chance to meet again, not to sort out what was left behind, but to understand what those years of separation had really done to their lives. When their eyes met in the middle of the room, Clara felt a wave of emotions that took her by storm. Enzo was there in front of her, more mature, but with that familiar sparkle in his eyes, something that, even with the wave of years, had not faded. He, unlike her, seemed to have found something like stability, as if, after so many battles, he had finally understood what was needed to move forward. Clara, in turn, was still looking for the answers he might have already found. But, as always, the past never disappears. He remains, camouflaged in the memories, waiting for the right moment to resurface. "Clara, how long?" he said, his voice deeper, but still charged with that softness she had always recognized. His expression, a mixture of surprise and something more, made Clara wonder how much he really knew about everything she had experienced. Enzo's smile, still so genuine, tried to disguise the complexity of the moment, but Clara knew that there was much more to it than meets the eye. She, in turn, felt a slight tension. The reunion brought her back to a place she thought she had left behind. But the truth was that, although the memories were distant, they were not forgotten. Yes, time went by quickly, didn't it? Clara answered, trying to give the simplest answer, but inside her a whirlwind of thoughts was forming. What did he think of her now? What did she represent to him after all these years? What did she really feel? Deep down, words seemed to be just a superficial game, a way of trying to fit the conversations of yesteryear into the patterns of the present. But what Clara knew, and what Enzo probably knew as well, was that this meeting was not a simple coincidence. It was an opportunity, a chance to revisit a past that, somehow, still had a voice that cried out for attention. What was left unsaid, what was never resolved, was there, hovering between them, asking to be approached. That exchange of words, although light and relaxed, seemed to carry a much greater weight. Clara, in her heart, felt as if the years of separation had not erased what existed between her and Enzo. They were, in a sense, like two souls who had gone their separate ways, but who, by dint of some unseen fate, were now again face to face. as if time had given a push for all that to reconnect. But the reunion was actually a key to something deeper. What was really left between them? What did that meeting mean? The answer was still shrouded in mystery, but Clara felt that the truth would come out, as if the backstage of her stories could finally be revealed. Enzo, somehow, seemed to be at peace with everything. There was something in his posture that said, I moved on, but without despising what had happened. Clara, on the other hand, felt that she was still looking for her way. Yesterday's wounds were closed, but the scars still existed, and the feeling that there was something to be resolved hung in the air. What did the reunion mean to her? For him, what had time done to their lives? To the dreams they had both shared in childhood, and to the silent promises that might never have been said? The words were there, on the verge of being spoken, but they could not yet materialize. The moment was important, but it was also a reflection of all that time and life had shaped in them. Like time, unresolved issues don't fall apart just because of a chance encounter. They stay there, waiting for the right moment to be understood. What was really left between Clara and Enzo, then? A connection that time has not been able to erase. But what did that mean for both of them? How would a reunion, with all its surprises and tensions, be a watershed in their personal stories? And, more importantly, what would each one take away from this exchange? Was the meeting just the beginning of a new journey? Or was it just another chapter in those lives that, no matter how hard they tried to move on, were hopelessly connected? Time, as always, shows us that the answers are not always clear. But for Clara and Enzo, the truth was about to be discovered. Over time, the conversation between Clara and Enzo deepened, as if time had opened a door to what had been left behind, but which never disappeared. At first, the words were still timid, almost formal, as if both were trying to test the ground, to measure the impact of the emotions that were already there, but that had not yet been verbalized. But the simple fact that they were there, side by side, bringing up memories of a distant time, a time when everything seemed simpler, lighter, made the distance between them decrease with each word, with each look. What Clara didn't know is that deep down, she wasn't just reliving a part of her story with Enzo. She was rescuing a part of herself that she believed had been buried in the years of hardship, in the years when priorities were different, when life demanded that she be strong and unbeatable. She saw herself again in that young woman full of dreams, full of hope, and, alongside Enzo, these feelings began to emerge with unexpected intensity, as if time had actually stopped for both of them, as if nothing had changed, and all that was left there was a genuine connection that had always existed. But at the same time, there was a silent struggle within her. Clara knew she couldn't get carried away by the feelings of the past. Life had taught hard lessons, and she was no longer the same girl who was enchanted by small gestures, with the promises of a better future. She had learned, the hard way, that true strength came from within, from the ability to take control of her own life and not depend on anyone else to achieve her goals. Enzo, with all his charm and that familiarity that she knew so well, represented something that, as much as it attracted her, also made her question what she really wanted. Could she trust again? Was the love of old something real, or just an illusion that time and longing had transformed into something greater than it really was? The most intriguing thing for Clara was to realize that, next to him, feelings seemed to grow, like a plant that germinates without you noticing. It was as if she was being pulled back into something she had tried, for so long, to bury and overcome. At the same time, she had the feeling that it was impossible to simply leave behind the years of pain, the mistakes made, the choices that had to be made for her to get there. Enzo represented, in some way, a time when she was vulnerable, a time when she still believed that love could be the solution to all problems. And though Clara's mind tried to drift away from this romantic idea, her heart was still drawn to it all. As the meetings became more frequent, Clara began to realize that the relationship with Enzo had a much greater emotional weight than she imagined. Conversations, which were once just a way to fill the silence, began to become moments of sharing, of true exchange. It was as if they were reconnecting not only their lives, but also the dreams they had once shared, the hopes they had, and which, for a while, seemed to have been forgotten. But, as she already knew, memory has the power to resurrect what seemed lost, to bring to light everything that was left behind. This rapprochement was not something simple. Clara could not afford to indulge in her feelings impulsively. She knew how risky this could be, how much getting carried away for a moment could destabilize her entire journey of transformation and overcoming. After all, she had achieved a lot since the time she had lived with Enzo, and part of her feared that going back to what she felt for him might mean losing control, losing the past she had carefully built. But at the same time, there was a part of her that wondered, why deny what she felt? After all, what would life be like if we didn't allow ourselves to feel? How could she continue this journey of transformation without facing the emotions that arose, without understanding the impact that Enzo still had on her life? It was a complex issue. Rationality and emotion were in a constant struggle within her, and each encounter with Enzo was an internal battle that she didn't know if she was winning or losing. The hardest thing was to realize that there were no easy answers, and that the past, as distant as it was not that far away. The reunion with Enzo brought up not only the feelings she had for him, but also the pains of what had not been resolved between them, as if their love, which never ended, had been stuck in limbo, waiting for a resolution that didn't come. And she knew, deep down, that this lack of resolution was interfering with the way she dealt with everything around her. How could I move forward without facing these unresolved issues? Clara's dilemma was a reflection of a larger truth, that often, unexpected rapprochements don't just come to bring joy, but also to challenge the way we see ourselves, what we want, and what we're willing to fight for. Clara now needed to decide which path to follow, letting herself be carried away by what the reunion with Enzo awakened in her, or staying firm in her own journey of transformation, knowing that love, although beautiful, could also be a dangerous distraction. What did she really want? And, most importantly, what did she need to be happy, without losing control of her own life? These questions began to dominate her mind as she spent more time with Enzo, rediscovering the connection, the looks, the gestures, the unspoken words. But what was really going on between them? Would they be able to rewrite the story of a love that never had an ending, or had time already done its job irreversibly? Clara's internal battle was far from over. The pressure was palpable. Clara felt the looks, the words that were not spoken, but that were in the air, hovering between her and Enzo's family, like a dark cloud about to collapse. From the moment the reunion with Enzo became more than a simple coincidence, she knew that the ghost of the past would return, and that his family's disapproval would be a stumbling block, a barrier that would not be easy to overcome. They had never liked her. They had never accepted the difference between their origins, the distance that existed between the expectations they had for their son's future and what Clara represented in their lives. And there she was, in the living room of Enzo's house, feeling the weight of her family's history on her shoulders. She knew that she was facing not only Enzo's parents, but also a society that had always believed that people like her did not belong to the circles of the successful, the privileged. She was working class, someone who had fought for everything she had achieved, someone who was not ashamed of her history, but who knew that, in the eyes of many people, her background was a burden. And there, at that moment, he was about to face the biggest fight of his life. What bothered her most, however, was not their disapproval per se. It was the way she felt that, over the years, she had internalized this opinion, this judgment. It was as if she had spent so much time trying to prove to others that she was capable, that she was worthy, that she forgot that the only person who needed to believe in herself was herself. This internal conflict intensified as the cutting words and judgmental glances of each member of Enzo's family became more evident. But instead of retreating, Clara felt something awaken within her, a force she didn't know still existed. The pressure of those people who, in his view, tried to decide his value, did not have the expected effect. Instead of cowering or giving in, she took a deep breath and, with a calm that only the most challenging moments can provide, stood up. I am who I am, and my origin does not define who I am or what I can be, she said with firmness that even she herself was surprised. She knew that those words were more than a defense. They were an affirmation of her own journey, of her own evolution. It wasn't easy. Of course not. But at that moment, Clara realized that the real battle was not against the expectations of Enzo's family, but against the inner voices that, for so long, had tried to make her doubt her own worth. She realized that for too long, She had allowed the gaze of others to be stronger than her own vision of who she was. And there, in a room full of uncomfortable looks and disguised speech, she made a choice. A difficult choice, but one that would become a milestone in his journey. Clara decided that, more than ever, she would choose to be true to herself. The reaction of Enzo's family was not immediate, and it was not expected to be. The silence around him seemed deafening. Each of the family members stood still in shock, digesting her words, absorbing the force with which she imposed herself. Clara knew she was taking a risk, that the situation could mark an even greater distance between her and Enzo, but deep down, she knew that if they really had any respect for her, they would understand her, and if they didn't, the loss would be theirs, not hers. What Clara didn't realize in that moment of courage was the impact that her words would have not only on Enzo's family, but on herself. By imposing herself, by defending herself with such conviction, she not only faced others, but also reconciled herself with the strongest version of herself, the Clara who knew what she was worth, and who would not let herself be diminished by anything or anyone. That was the turning point she was looking for in her life. A moment of clarity with a decision to be who she really was, without fear of showing her origins, her weaknesses, and her victories, became non-negotiable. But at the same time, the weight of his choices was far from over. She knew the journey wouldn't be easy. Enzo, as much as he cared deeply for her, was stuck with the expectations of family that had always guided him to follow a different path. And Clara didn't know how far he would be willing to go to defend her. Would he support her, or would she end up facing this battle alone? There was no way to predict. However, one thing was clear. Clara was no longer willing to diminish herself to fit into molds that were not made for her. She was who she was, and nothing or no one would make her turn back. She left that meeting with the feeling that something new had begun. But, as she well knew, the journey was far from complete. As she walked away from Enzo's house, walking down a silent street, the transformation in her life seemed to have taken a new turn. The confrontation with Enzo's family was more than a simple exchange of words. It was the first step of a new Clara, more confident, more determined to achieve what she wanted without caring about the obstacles imposed by anyone. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, she felt no fear. Each step she took at that moment brought her closer to a new version of herself, and what surprised her most was to realize that, contrary to what she had always imagined, the courage to impose herself did not come from desire to win over others, but from a deep connection with her own truth. What once seemed like an obstacle now turned out to be just a reflection of the power she had in her hands to shape her own story. She was in control more than ever, and with that thought, Clara felt the weight of victory in every cell of her body. But the real question that arose in his mind was, what would be the next step in this journey? The battle with Enzo's family could have been fought, but what would come next? A new phase was just beginning, and Clara knew that the choices she would make from now on could determine the course of everything she had always dreamed of for herself. As time passed, Clara and Enzo began to reconnect in a deeper, truer way. It was not just a matter of rediscovering the old feelings of the past, but of something stronger, more mature, which was forming between them. Love, which at first seemed to be a small, fragile flame, was now becoming an intense light, a light capable of illuminating not only their lives, but also those around them. The bond between them grew every day, not only because of what they were together, but because of what they were becoming as individuals. It was as if, by allowing themselves to live this story, they were both taking a decisive step towards building a fuller version of themselves. Clara's journey wasn't just about her relationship with Enzo. With each challenge faced, with each situation where she had to reaffirm and impose herself, Clara began to realize that her story was touching many people around her. Friends, family, even casual acquaintances, all came to see in her not only the woman who had overcome her own limitations, but someone who was ready to break barriers and redefine what it meant to be strong. Her trajectory of overcoming has become, for many, a reflection of courage and perseverance, an inspiration for those who, like her, were on the margins of society or who, in some way, felt that they had no voice. And it was in this environment of transformation and growth that Clara and Enzo's relationship began to attract more attention. They were no longer just involved in something private, But their union became a symbol of resistance, of love that resisted obstacles, of a couple who, despite adversity, were willing to show the world that when two people truly understand each other, nothing can separate them. It was not just about a courtship or a common relationship, but about building a life together marked by authenticity and the strength that both had within themselves. And this spread, naturally, to those around them. Clara, once seen only as a woman who unfortunately had been born into a humble family, was now beginning to be recognized for her strength. The world around her began to see not the stigma of her origins, but the woman she became, a woman of courage, who knew where she wanted to go and who was not afraid to fight for her dreams. Her trajectory was gaining a prominent place, and it didn't take long for her to be invited to share her story, to be a voice for those who did not feel represented. And with each new opportunity, Clara became more aware of her own transformation, more comfortable with the space she occupied in the world. Public recognition began to arrive gradually, but with force. The words of support and compliments, which Clara previously imagined would be distant or difficult to conquer, began to be part of her routine. People from different backgrounds approached her, admiring her history, her authenticity. Clara came to be seen as a woman who, instead of hiding her origins, embraced them with pride, showing that her value was far beyond the circumstances in which she had been born. It was as if her light was finally being recognized by everyone, and she knew that her journey of overcoming was not only hers. It was that of everyone who believed in the power of transformation, change, and the courage to go beyond expectations. This recognition was not limited to words alone. Clara saw her image being linked to causes of equality, of fighting for opportunities for all, without distinction of social class. She began to be invited to events, to lectures, to occupy prominent spaces where she could share her experience and inspire more people. And each time he talked about his trajectory, the impact he had on others intensified. The woman who had for so long hidden in the shadows of comparison and judgment was now standing out as a leader, a woman capable of redefining the standards of success and overcoming. Enzo, on the other hand, has never been so proud of Clara. He watched her from afar, his heart full of admiration, watching his partner grow before his eyes. It wasn't just their relationship that was evolving, but the way he saw the world, how he saw Clara. She had become a source of inspiration, not only to other people, but also to him. He realized, more than ever, how much Clara's presence in his life had challenged him to be more than he thought he could be. Alongside her, he began to see life with new eyes, a life in which there were no limitations, only possibilities. The impact of Clara's presence in Enzo's life was immeasurable. He knew that before her, he would never have believed that they could achieve everything they were achieving together. She was the quiet force behind his own accomplishments, and at the same time, the safe haven where he would always find support. The reciprocity of their relationship was palpable. It was not only love that united them, but deep respect for each other's journey, for mutual growth, for the desire to make the other be the best version of themselves. Public recognition, which once seemed distant and even unthinkable to Clara, has become a daily reality. She was, little by little, becoming a symbol not only of personal overcoming, but of a new way of looking at life stories, of realizing that success is not measured by a person's origin, but by their ability to transform adversity into something positive, something that can inspire others. And in the midst of all this, Clara began to realize that her journey was just beginning. The love with Enzo, the conquests, and the public recognition were just signs of an even greater transformation. Clara knew that the impact of her story would go far beyond what she imagined. His trajectory was not only about his relationship with Enzo, nor about the public victories he achieved. It was, above all, about personal transformation, about the courage to live your truth without fear of being judged, about the strength to defy expectations and achieve your own happiness. Love, now stronger than ever, flourished not only between them, but in every aspect of their lives. And Clara knew that there was still much more to come. The day was bright, the kind of day that seemed to have been tailor-made for an important moment. Clara, unknowingly, was about to experience something that would change the course of her life forever. The event that Enzo had organized seemed to be just a celebration, an occasion to gather friends, family, and others who were part of his journey. But for Clara, It was something that went far beyond a simple party. She couldn't see that afternoon how every step she had taken had brought her there, to that place, to that moment. The true magnitude of what was about to happen was something she couldn't predict. It was impossible to ignore the sparkle in Enzo's eyes, a sparkle that was not only one of happiness, but of deep commitment, of something he was about to reveal to everyone, but especially to Clara. He knew that, for a long time, she had questioned herself about her worth, about how much she would be able to achieve without having to prove anything to anyone, without having to show that she deserved to be loved. Now, he was there, in the midst of a celebration that represented much more than they imagined. That party was not just about the moments they had shared, but about everything that brought them together. Love, acceptance, transformation. It was the perfect setting for a request that, for Enzo, represented a promise of eternal and unconditional love. As the event ran its course, Clara felt watched, but in a way that didn't make her uncomfortable. The people around were smiling, laughing, and she, as always, was there to share everyone's joy. However, there was something in the air, something she couldn't immediately identify, but that made her feel that this moment was special in an inexplicable way. She didn't know it yet, but that day, everything she had experienced so far was about to be crowned with a gesture that would leave her speechless. Enzo was approaching her, and she noticed a movement. The smiles around became more intense, and a soft silence began to spread across the room. Clara didn't know whether to look at him or the ground, and her mind began to race, full of questions and feelings. How could something so simple cause such a whirlwind inside her? The truth was that what he was about to do was not a surprise, but the way he would choose to do it in a significant event made it all the more impactful. He wasn't just proposing a marriage. He was proposing to Clara as part of his life, with all her imperfections, her strengths and weaknesses, and all that she had overcome over the years. What he would do later, in front of all those who watched her, was not just a marriage proposal. It was a declaration of love that transcended any form of external validation. It was the acceptance of Clara as she was, with all her complexities and differences. It was the public recognition of the woman she had become and, at the same time, the commitment that he would love her unconditionally, without expectations of perfection, but with the certainty that together they could build something true and lasting. When Enzo knelt down, the room fell silent. Clara, initially surprised, felt her heart race. It was as if all the time she had spent trying to feel worthy of something so great was finally being validated by a simple gesture. He looked at her with an intensity that made the world around him disappear. There was nothing more than what they were sharing at that moment. There were no more questions about their origins, nor about the obstacles they had faced to get there. Only the recognition of what it meant to love and be loved. "Clara," he said in a voice choked with emotion, "I love you with all that you are, with all your stories, with all your struggles. And I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you accept to be my wife?" The mere fact that he used the words, "all that you are," resonated deeply with her. He saw her as someone complete, someone worthwhile, someone who was more than any label society had tried to put on her. And at that moment, with everyone's eyes on her, Clara realized that, for the first time, she didn't need to defend herself or explain anything. She was already there, and he accepted her exactly as she was. The weight she had carried for so long, the feeling of being constantly judged and devalued, was dissipating, and what remained was the pure, simple, but immense love she felt for Enzo, and the love he was now showing for her. Clara's answer was a smile, that smile that spoke more than any words could express. And by giving the answer everyone was waiting for, she not only affirmed her love for Enzo, but also her acceptance of being loved, of being seen as someone worthy of that love. She was, finally, accepting her own story, accepting that sometimes life's twists and turns don't happen the way we imagine, but exactly the way we need to grow. The moment Enzo lifted her up, his eyes shining with happiness, Clara felt that something much bigger was at stake. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a culmination of everything they had faced together. Overcoming, transformation, and the strength to move forward. It was the beginning of a new phase in their lives, a phase where the challenges now seemed smaller compared to the greatness of what they had achieved together. While everyone around applauded and celebrated, Clara felt an immense peace. It was as if the world was finally acknowledging what she had always known deep in her heart. She deserved to be happy, and she had someone by her side who believed it with her. There was no more fear, no insecurities. There was, indeed, a certainty that began to take over her heart. She was exactly where she should be. And when she looked at Enzo with that sincere smile on his face, Clara felt that everything she had experienced, all the difficulties and obstacles, had been part of a journey that now seemed to have found its purpose. The proposal, with all its beauty and simplicity, was not the end of their story, but the beginning of something even grander, something that the two of them were now ready to build, not just as a couple, but as two human beings who, when they met, had finally found their true home in each other. That day was, without a doubt, the most special of all. The setting was full of carefully thought-out details, but what really made this wedding unique was not just the flowers, the dresses, or the smiles of the guests. It was something deeper, something that could not be captured by cameras or described by empty words. Claire and Enzo were about to experience one of the most transformative moments of their lives, but the meaning of this day transcended any conventional celebration. It was a representation of victory over everything that separated them, the conquest of a love that defied all expectations. The place where it all began, the place where Clara had felt rejected and invisible for so long, was now being transformed before her eyes. It was as if the space itself was surrendering to its journey of overcoming. What once represented the weight of distrust and criticism now became the stage for a personal victory. Every corner of that environment, every detail, seemed to have been woven with the threads of courage and persistence. Clara could feel it deep within her being, as if the whole universe was saying, finally, you've made it here. You've earned your place. The ceremony was not just about the act of getting married. It was a moment of affirmation, where Clara allowed herself, for the first time, to be completely seen and recognized without masks or disguises. There at the altar, she was no longer the insecure young woman, afraid that her story would be a burden. She was a woman who, with strength and resilience, had rewritten her own narrative. And Enzo was by her side, with his eyes full of genuine love, like someone who knew that this journey was not only hers, but theirs. Their connection was palpable, as if their love had been forged in every challenge they faced together. Clara's dress, simple but elegant, symbolized her true essence. No unnecessary adornments, just the truth of what she was. Her eyes, which had previously drifted to the ground, were now steady, looking at Enzo with a confidence that was reflected in his posture. She no longer had any doubts about how much she deserved to be there. The walk down the aisle, alongside her family, who now supported her unconditionally, was a reflection of the entire journey she took. Each step echoed the decision to no longer hide or give in to outside pressures. She was there, open and free to live the love she had always known she deserved. As Enzo looked at her, his eyes shining with a mixture of wonder and happiness, Clara felt a peace she had never known existed. There was no longer the weight of doubt about its value. There was no longer a need to prove that his love was worthy of being lived and celebrated. She and Enzo had, together, broken barriers, defied stigmas, and were there, ready to build a life together, regardless of the opinions of those who could not see beyond appearances. And the moment they said, "I do," what resonated in their hearts was not just a word, but all the emotional weight it carried. It was a yes to freedom, acceptance, and, above all, to the construction of a future without the ties that had limited them so much in past. It was confirmation that their love was no longer at the mercy of critical eyes or external expectations. They were ready to walk side by side, independent but deeply connected. But the wedding was not just a celebration between them. It was also a message to the world. For all the people who once looked at Clara and Enzo and doubted their ability to overcome adversity, that moment was a silent answer. A no, said to the prejudices that still surround love and acceptance. Each smile of the friends and family present was the expression of support for a choice made with courage. And, in some way, everyone there shared in the victory. Their marriage was not theirs alone. It was of all those who believe in the power of transformation, of change, of the courage to be who we really are, without fear of judgment. When the ceremony came to an end, the banquet was only a reflection of what was happening there. The laughter echoed, the words of affection and congratulations filled the air. But Clara knew that in that space that had once been a symbol of rejection, she had conquered, with Enzo by her side, something much greater, a genuine recognition of her strength. Those who once looked at her with suspicion now saw in her an example of resilience. Not only had she found love, but she had transformed the place of pain into a space of celebration and overcoming. As the fireworks lit up the sky, Clara reflected on how much that night represented. It wasn't just a wedding party. It was a culmination of a journey of acceptance, of fighting for your own truth, and of a love that, despite all the odds, blossomed. And as she danced in Enzo's arms, she knew that this was just the beginning of an even grander chapter that they were both about to write. She looked around, seeing the smiling faces, the joy that took over everyone, and deep in her heart, she knew that this was a materialization of a dream. Not the dream of fairy tale, but the dream of a life built on true love, respect, and the recognition that when we choose to surrender to a journey of transformation, we can change the narrative and conquer everything that seemed unattainable. And so, between laughter and hugs, Clara and Enzo became not just a couple, but a symbol of resistance, of unbeatable love, and of a future that was now completely within their reach. What once seemed impossible now showed itself as a shared reality, marked by the union of two souls who, with courage, allowed themselves to write their own history. And as the night wore on and the celebration continued, Clara felt, for the first time, that her journey was finally complete. But there was something more to be experienced, something even bigger. And she knew that this was just a first step in a life full of possibilities, achievements, and a lot of love. If you've come this far, it's because the story touched you in some way, right? Maybe you are also living your own journey of transformation, or who knows, following that of someone special. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything we've talked about today. So, if you can leave a comment saying this message was for me, it will be very good to know that we are connected in this exchange. Oh, and if you like this content, give me that like. It means a lot to us, and it's a simple way to show that you connect with what we share here. And if you want to continue on this journey of discoveries and stories, there's a video here on the side that will complement this theme in a very special way. Click there, and let's move on together. See you soon.